My name is Madeline Carter. I'm 33 years old, and for most of my adult life, my family has treated me like an afterthought. I was halfway up the grand staircase when Aunt Celeste's voice sliced through the music and laughter like a blade. "Oh, honey, did you come straight from a thrift store?" Her voice was sweet, mocking, and loud enough to silence the conversations around her. I froze. My fingers tightened around the railing. The silk dress I wore suddenly felt like paper against my skin. It wasn't designer, but it was elegant, deep navy blue classic neckline, subtle stitching, and I had chosen it carefully. For me, not for them. Laughter rippled through the room. Haley, my cousin the bride-to-be, smirked behind a glass of rosé. The other girls leaned in, whispering, giggling like we were still in high school. I stared down at them from the staircase, heart-pounding jaw clenched. But I didn't say a word. I'd come alone. No date, no allies. Just a quiet presence in a family that celebrated flash and dismissed anything that didn't sparkle. I was used to this, the subtle cuts dressed as jokes, the glances that skimmed over me like I wasn't there. But this time was different, because 5 minutes earlier I'd stepped out of a black SUV with bulletproof windows and diplomatic plates. I'd left my federal security detail parked around the corner under strict orders to remain unseen until called. They didn't know who I was now, and they had no idea that 6 more SUVs were about to pull up to that very driveway, armed, tinted, synchronized, just to escort me to a secure facility. I gave the room one last glance. Aunt Celeste was still laughing, her back turned. Haley was already uploading a photo of me to Instagram captioned something like "Charity Case Chic." I took a breath. "Ma'am," came a quiet voice in my earpiece. "Your window is closing. Do you want the team to move?" I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and said, "Yes, bring them around." And then I stepped into the lion's den, not to roar, but to let them hear the silence before the truth arrived on wheels. I wasn't supposed to be the one who made it. Not in their eyes. I was born in Muncie, Indiana, the daughter of a woman who scrubbed hospital floors on the night shift, and a man who disappeared before I could speak my first word. My mother, Teresa, worked 2 jobs and still found time to quiz me on vocabulary while folding laundry. We didn't have much, actually. We had less than not much, but we had books. Books and resilience. That made me strange to the rest of the Carter family. My mother was the black sheep, the only one of her sisters who didn't marry money or live in a neighborhood with gates. Aunt Celeste, the matriarch, after Grandma passed, had a sprawling, white-pillared home with a circular driveway and summer brunches served on glass platters. Her daughters, Haley and Lydia, had ballet lessons, European summer camps, and Chanel bags before they hit puberty. I had second-hand coats and an encyclopedic memory. Even as a child, I knew I didn't belong. I was the cousin who wore hand-me-downs that didn't quite fit. The one who couldn't afford the same birthday gifts or join the family trips to Aspen or Naples. I smiled through it. I got good at pretending it didn't sting. They'd laugh at how quiet I was, how I always had her nose in a book. Aunt Celeste once joked that I'd grow up to be a secretary or a librarian, someone useful, just not impressive. I never corrected her, not even when I graduated valedictorian at my public high school. Not when I earned a full-ride scholarship to Georgetown University, double majoring in international relations and cybersecurity. Not even when at 25 I was recruited straight out of grad school into a special operations unit within the U.S. Department of State focused on digital intelligence and foreign intervention response, because I had learned something crucial. People who need to be impressed can never be trusted with the truth. So I let them think I was nothing special. I didn't post on social media. I wore plain clothes, drove a nondescript car, declined most family invitations. The ones I did attend, I stayed in the back. I let their assumptions protect my peace. But the truth is, while Haley was learning to contour her cheekbones for Instagram and Aunt Celeste was hiring a private chef to make foie gras for Easter brunch, I was halfway around the world, embedded in a crisis zone, overseeing negotiations between 2 foreign diplomats threatening war over water access. I've sat in rooms where my silence meant life or death, where my analysis turned chaos into compromise. But not once did anyone in my family ask me what I actually did. They assumed I worked for the government in some vague, low-level capacity. Civil service was the term Aunt Celeste used at Christmas when she described me to a friend of hers with a laugh. She does something with computers, I think. Not glamorous, but it pays the bills. I didn't correct her then either. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't chip away at me. What hurt wasn't that they didn't know the details. It's that they didn't care to ask. As if my value only existed in what I wore, who I dated, how much I flaunted. In their world, status was external, the car you drove, the brand on your shoes, the name on your invitation. In mine, status was the signature on the bottom of a peace accord, the whisper of clearance codes passed across secure lines, the kind of work you can't brag about because real power never announces itself. The only person who ever really saw me was my mother. She used to call me Maddie the Marble. She'd say, "You're small and round on the outside, baby, but strong and cool and clear all the way through. People won't see it until you crack their illusions." She died 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Quick. Ugly. Unfair. The last thing she made me promise lying in that cold hospital bed was, don't ever shrink just because they squint. Let them adjust their eyes. So when Haley's engagement invitation came in the mail, white cardstock with gold embossing and a smug little note at the bottom, dress code cocktail glam. No exceptions, I laughed out loud. I hadn't been to one of their events in years. They'd stopped inviting me to most things. But this time, I felt something shift. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the ghost of my mother's voice in the back of my head. Maybe it was the fact that I had just returned from a 3-month mission in Eastern Europe, where I'd helped broker the safe extraction of a kidnapped diplomat's child from hostile territory. That day, I'd had blood on my boots. That night, I'd come home to an empty apartment. I stood in my closet looking at my options. I didn't own anything designer, but I pulled out the navy dress, the one I'd bought years ago for a state dinner in D.C. Simple, structured, timeless. It fit perfectly. The day of the party, I told my assistant to prep the transport team low visibility, minimal detail parked around the block. Just in case, because something in me knew this would be the last time they saw me as the girl in the thrift store dress. And I was ready. The ballroom was a living shrine to excess. There were rose petals floating in glass fountains, champagne pyramids that sparkled under chandeliers the size of small planets, and waiters in white gloves offering caviar bites on mirrored trays. Everyone there looked like they had been curated by an editorial team, not a hair out of place, not a single thread that wasn't designer. I had barely taken 3 steps inside when I noticed the glances. They weren't subtle. First, from Haley's sorority sisters' girls who used to roll their eyes at me during Thanksgivings when I'd bring a book to the table instead of gossip. Then, from her fiancé Brandon, who gave me a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The same smile you give someone when you're not sure if they're a guest or part of the catering staff. I kept walking, head high, shoulders relaxed, eyes scanning the room for exits and sightlines. Old habits. Then came the moment, the one that would stick in my bones. I had just reached the edge of the main hall when Haley's voice cut through the music. Loud, airy, and too pointed to be innocent. Wait, Maddie, is that what you're actually wearing? She was standing near the dessert bar, surrounded by her circle, all glossed lips and champagne teeth. I turned toward her, slowly, carefully. I hadn't seen her in 3 years, and she looked exactly the same, unnervingly flawless. Hair that obeyed her, teeth bleached to submission. She was holding a flute of pink champagne and wearing a dress that probably cost more than my rent. I didn't reply, just offered a polite nod. "Oh my God," one of the girls whispered, not quietly enough. "It's like, plain. That's actually brave of her." They burst out laughing. I felt the heat rush to my ears, but I didn't move. I stood there in my simple navy dress clutch in one hand, security earpiece tucked discreetly under my hair, calm, detached, practiced. Then Haley tilted her head with faux concern. "Don't take it the wrong way," she said sweetly. "I just didn't know the State Department had such relaxed fashion standards." My jaw clenched. She didn't even know what department I worked for. She never had. "She probably just came from work," one of the others said. "Like straight out of a basement office or something." "Right," Haley added. "I bet it's one of those gray cubicles with like a little microwave and sad oatmeal." That drew a fresh round of giggles. I almost laughed too, not because it was funny, but because they were so confidently wrong. So deliciously uninformed. I had been in Kabul, Warsaw, and Ramallah. I had stood across from people who could kill with a look and convince with a whisper. I had filed reports that shaped international policy. I had worn bulletproof vests and negotiated ceasefires under collapsing ceilings. But to Haley, I was oatmeal in a microwave. I turned ready to leave it there to let their ignorance hang in the air like perfume. But then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. A notification from a private family chat I had long forgotten I was still in. There it was. A photo of me. Taken just now, from behind. My dress, my hair, even my slightly awkward stance as I stood alone. Posted by Haley. Captioned Charity Case Chic. Your thrift queen. My chest tightened. It was small, petty, childish. But it was public. Her followers would see it. Our family would see it. And more importantly, she wanted me to see it. This wasn't just a dig. It was a performance. That was when something in me, something I had been keeping under glass for years, cracked. I straightened, pressed a finger to the earpiece tucked beneath my left ear, and whispered, "Activate window. Confirm presence at North Gate in 3 minutes." There was a pause. Confirmed. "SUVs are ready. Protocol green." I ended the call and tucked the phone back into my clutch. Then I walked back into the heart of the party. I passed Haley and her circle again. This time, she didn't say anything, just raised an eyebrow and gave me a smug little nod, like she had won something. I smiled at her. "By the way," I said softly, "you'll want to be near the front entrance in about 2 minutes. Something interesting is about to happen." Her brows furrowed, but before she could respond, I was already walking away past the floral arrangements, the golden chairs, the live string quartet. My heels tapped across the marble like punctuation marks. Outside, the air was cooler, cleaner. And then, right on cue, the first black SUV turned into the circular drive, followed by a second, then a third. All 6 vehicles rolled up in formation, each one identical matte finish, dark-tinted windows, unmarked license plates. The kind of convoy you only saw on the news or in movies involving heads of state. The valet boys froze. Guests drifted toward the windows. Curious murmurs rose into a buzz. Then the lead SUV door opened and Agent Ramirez stepped out, sharp suit, earpiece badge. He scanned the area and nodded at me once. "Ma'am," he said, "we're ready when you are." My family, all of them, were now gathered near the entrance. Aunt Celeste's hand flew to her chest. Haley's jaw had dropped. Brandon squinted like he wasn't sure if it was a prank. I walked toward them slowly, deliberately. Each step heavier than the last, not with weight, but with years. Years of being dismissed, mocked, misunderstood. I stopped in front of them, looked Haley in the eye. "You might want to delete that post," I said. "It's a national security concern now." And with that, I turned and stepped into the SUV. The doors shut behind me with a soft, sealed click. The convoy rolled away, and not a single one of them laughed. The leather seat was cold against my back as the SUV pulled away from the estate. For a long time, I didn't speak. I just stared out the tinted window at the mansion growing smaller in the rearview mirror, its lights warm and glittering, its laughter still echoing in my ears like a cruel memory. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was hollow. Agent Ramirez, seated in the front passenger seat, glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "Everything all right, Director?" I nodded once. "Yes, just take the long route. I need a few minutes." "Understood." The silence returned. It's funny how pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it settles into your bones, heavy and familiar, like an old coat you forgot you were wearing. That night, it wrapped around me so tightly I couldn't breathe. I thought I had outgrown this, that I had built a life so solid, so accomplished, that their opinions couldn't touch me anymore. And yet, one humiliating moment, one stupid joke in front of gold-rimmed champagne glasses had stripped all of that away. Why? Because they were my people. They were supposed to see me, not the title, not the dress, me, but they never had, not even when I tried. I thought back to that Christmas after college. I had just completed my first round of security clearance and was working 12-hour days sorting intelligence threads for potential domestic threats. My mind was electric with purpose. I was young, green, but hungry. Haley had shown up that year with her then boyfriend flashing an engagement ring the size of a molar. Aunt Celeste had raved. The whole family was buzzing about how Haley's going to marry into money again. Someone had asked me what I was doing. I told them I'd started working with federal security infrastructure, that it was important and I couldn't say much. So, like an assistant Uncle Mark asked. No, I replied carefully. More like early-stage data coordination for, oh so like spreadsheets and email forwarding, Aunt Celeste said with a laugh, already looking away. That moment stuck with me for years, not because they misunderstood, but because they didn't care to understand. I wasn't interesting to them unless I sparkled. They couldn't see how hard I had worked, that I had spent countless nights hunched over terminals parsing real-time threat logs, that I had translated intercepted chatter with nothing but coffee instinct and a racing deadline, that at 27 I was flown out to Geneva to sit silently behind a Secretary of State as she debated terms of a hostage release, and my briefing folder had her talking points word for word. They didn't know about the mission in Syria where I had to make a judgment call that saved the lives of 4 embedded assets, or the time my field report prevented a car bombing in Jakarta, or the classified project I led that was now part of active national defense protocol. They didn't know, because I never told them, and maybe that's on me. I built a fortress around my life, mistaking silence for protection. I let their voices echo while I bit my tongue, smiled politely, and stood off to the side. I thought that was maturity to rise above it to let the work speak for itself. But now, I wasn't so sure. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my mother's old rosary. Not because I needed to pray, but because holding it reminded me who I came from. Teresa Carter had never been flashy. She didn't own pearls or perfume or pressed linen napkins, but she was fierce, unyielding. She once slapped a man in the supermarket for calling me white trash, then paid for his groceries while he gawked. You don't fix hate with more hate, she told me later. You fix it by making them irrelevant. She would have hated tonight, the spectacle, the venom under the smiles. But she would have loved what came next. As the convoy neared D.C., Ramirez leaned back slightly. Ma'am, headquarters wants to confirm whether we'll proceed to Langley or reroute to the liaison facility downtown. Downtown, I said without hesitation. Let them know I'll debrief in person. Copy. I sat back. If I had to walk into another war zone, fine. At least in those rooms I was seen. I was heard. But that thought nagged at me again. Why did tonight still cut so deep? It wasn't just the dress, or the post, or the public mockery. It was that I had made peace with being invisible, until I realized how lonely that peace really was. I had no husband, no children, no close circle of girlfriends to text jokes about the dress fiasco, just a network of colleagues, analysts, and field operatives, brilliant people, yes, but none of them knew me outside of my clearance level and strategic value, and as the city skyline came into view, something in me ached. I had power. I had access. I had global influence, but I didn't have connection. And now, the people who were supposed to love me first, before the titles, before the agency, before the accomplishments, had tried to reduce me to a punchline. I turned away from the window, suddenly exhausted. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I pressed my mother's rosary to my lips, and I whispered something I hadn't said aloud in years. I just wanted them to be proud of me. The words sat there in the silence unanswered, until finally I said to myself, they don't get to define that anymore. The SUVs rolled into the secure underground garage, and I knew I wasn't going to stay invisible anymore. I walked into the downtown liaison facility just after 11 p.m., the kind of government building no one noticed tucked between an embassy and an upscale wine bar. It looked like any other sandstone box from the outside, but inside it was all reinforced steel retinal scanners and a silence that held more secrets than sound. Director Carter, the night supervisor, greeted me with a crisp nod. Ops 3 is cleared for you. Secure line is active. I nodded, walking past him into the glass briefing room. As the doors sealed shut, I exhaled, letting the familiar air cool the heat that still lingered under my skin. A holographic display lit up the table with the seal of the United States Intelligence Coordination Office. My title, Director Special Strategic Liaison, glowed beneath it. I tapped the panel and watched the mission log spin to life. But my mind wasn't in the Middle East or Eastern Europe tonight. It was still back in that ballroom, still replaying Haley's face, still hearing the laughter. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. For years, I had protected my family from the truth not out of necessity but out of some twisted desire to shield them from discomfort, to keep the peace. I thought being above it meant staying silent, but silence had become its own kind of lie, and I was done with it. A knock at the glass broke my thoughts. It was Ramirez. "Ma'am, there's an inquiry from D.C. Public Affairs. Small press outlet is asking for comment. About the vehicles about you. Apparently, someone tipped them off after the party. Words spreading that a top federal official made a scene at a private function in Arlington. Of course they were." I sighed. "Draft a neutral statement, just enough to confirm my title, not my division. No operational links, and no denial. Let the speculation breathe a little." Ramirez's mouth twitched into the faintest smile. "Understood." He stepped away, and I sat back, fingers drumming the table. For years, I'd moved like a shadow on purpose. In my world, visibility could be vulnerability. But now, maybe, just maybe, visibility could also be liberation. I pulled out my phone. For the first time in ages, I opened my personal Instagram, the one I hadn't used in nearly 5 years. Dusty. Empty. A single post from 2018, a photo of a beach at dawn, no caption. 5 likes. Tonight, I changed that. I uploaded a new photo, a candid shot Ramirez had taken earlier this year in Jordan. I was standing in front of a military helicopter headset, in hand, wind snapping at my clothes. No makeup, no filters. Just work. For the caption I typed, they called it charity case chic, but sometimes the ones you overlook are the ones making the hard calls behind the scenes. I serve my country quietly, but tonight, silence felt like complicity. Director Carter. Let them see. I hovered over the button for a long time. Then I pressed post. By morning, I knew it would circulate. Some would connect the dots. Haley would certainly see it. So would Aunt Celeste. There would be whispers, there would be questions, but I no longer felt like hiding behind vague job titles and evasive smiles. I was done shrinking to fit their comfort. Ramirez returned with an update. "Press teams on standby. You've got 3 outlets trying to confirm your ID through unofficial sources." I nodded. "Let them. No photos of the convoy, no breach of classified movement. Just let them wonder." "Yes, ma'am." When he left again, I sat in the silence, the humming of secure frequencies, the glow of encrypted files. And then I picked up my personal phone again, this time to call someone I hadn't spoken to in months. Lena, my best friend from college. We'd lost touch in the last couple of years, my fault, really. Too many missions, too many missed calls, too much distance wrapped in professionalism. She picked up after 2 rings. Maddie. Her voice cracked something open in me. "Hey," I said softly. "I didn't know who else to call." "Where have you been?" she breathed. "I just saw that post. I thought you were like in HR or something." I laughed, really laughed for the first time that night. "I've been around. Just hiding, I guess." There was a pause. "Then I'm proud of you." "You know that, right?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thank you." "You want to come over? I've got wine. Real cheap, unapologetically bad wine." I smiled. "That sounds perfect." We hung up and I made arrangements with my driver. And as I stepped back into the night, into the city that didn't know my name but depended on my silence, I realized something. Maybe I didn't need my family to see me. Maybe I just needed to let myself be seen. Not through press releases or grand SUV entrances, but through honest connection, through showing up fully for the people who actually cared. I had spent years mastering the art of invisibility, but invisibility isn't the same as strength. Strength is being visible and not flinching when people look. I wasn't going to hide behind duty anymore. I was going to start living beside it. 2 days later, I got the message. It came as a DM on Instagram, of all places. From Haley. Can we talk just that? No punctuation, no apology, no context. Typical. By then, the post I had made, the one of me by the helicopter, had crossed over 48,000 likes. A small article had run in The Hill vaguely describing my position, noting the rare public appearance at a private event that had caught the attention of federal protocol watchers. They didn't name Haley or the party, but if you'd been there, you'd know. I didn't reply. Not immediately. Instead, I closed the app and looked out my window. I was in my office, a gray windowless space beneath a building that didn't officially exist. 2 guards stood outside the door. The badge on my desk read Director M. Carter, Special Strategic Liaison. The woman they had mocked. She didn't disappear. She just stopped waiting for their recognition to validate her. That evening, Haley called me. Twice. I didn't pick up. On the 3rd try, I let it ring out, then called her back. I figured if she had something to say, she could say it when she wasn't surrounded by an audience. She answered on the 1st ring. "Oh, thank God," she blurted. "I didn't know if what do you want, Haley." There was a pause. I didn't know," she said quietly. "I didn't know what you did, that it was like, important." I sighed. "You didn't care to know." Silence again. "I wasn't trying to be cruel," she said quickly. "It was just a joke, you know, the dress and all." "It wasn't personal. It never is to the people laughing," I replied. "But it's always personal to the one being laughed at." She didn't respond. I heard the clink of glass in the background. She was probably pacing around her penthouse kitchen with a wine glass in hand. Haley always needed something in her hand when she felt uncomfortable. Something to control. "I don't want things to be weird between us," she finally said. "They've always been weird between us." She let out a breath. "Okay. Fair." Another pause. "Look. Mom's freaking out," she added with a nervous chuckle. She saw the news. "She thought you worked at like a passport office." I didn't laugh. Haley continued, trying to sound light. "And Brandon's coworkers keep asking if you're like in the CIA or something. I'm not." I cut in. "And that's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "Maddie, you want me to apologize in public. Take down the post. I already did that. What do you want?" I looked at my reflection in the glass. "Finally," I said, "I want you to understand that I've never needed your approval, but I deserved your respect, and you never gave me that." The words landed like stones. She went quiet. I could tell she didn't know what to say, and maybe that was the first honest moment she'd had in years. You and Aunt Celeste built your world around appearance, around shiny things, and for so long I let you believe I was beneath it all. But I was never beneath you, Haley. I was beyond you. More silence. "I didn't know you felt that way," she said softly. "That's because you never asked." There was a long breath on her end, like she wanted to cry but wouldn't allow herself to. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered, and for the first time in a long, long time. I believed her. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't, but I did say thank you. We ended the call shortly after, cordial, civil, but changed. I didn't expect us to become close. We weren't going to be sipping coffee and matching robes anytime soon. But something had been recalibrated, shifted. That same week, a message came through official channels. I'd been nominated for an Interagency Leadership Award, one rarely given to women, let alone those who operated mostly in shadow roles. I would have to attend a ceremony in a month, cameras, speeches, names on placards. For once, I said yes. I even invited Haley and Aunt Celeste. They didn't come, but they sent flowers. Small steps, small miracles. At the ceremony, I stood in front of a room filled with generals, ambassadors, analysts, and officials whose names never appear in public. When I accepted the award, I said, "We don't do this work for applause. We do it because peace is often a quiet victory. But today, I'll accept this visibility not for myself, but for every girl who was told she was just a background. You are not. You never were." Afterward, I saw myself in the mirror, a black dress this time, nothing fancy, but tailored with care. I looked like someone I would have admired when I was 16. I walked out of that hall into the crisp night air and felt for the first time in years completely and unapologetically whole. No anger, no bitterness, just clarity. They didn't get to write my story anymore. I did. A month after the ceremony, I found the navy blue dress again. It was hanging quietly at the back of my closet, pressed untouched, unashamed. The same dress they had laughed at. The same one I'd walked into that ballroom wearing like armor. A dress simple enough to be ignored until someone powerful wore it with purpose. I didn't put it in a donation bin like I'd once planned. Instead, I wore it again. Not to a gala or a mission briefing or a press event, but to something far more ordinary. It was Sunday, and I'd invited Lena over to my apartment for coffee and cinnamon rolls. We hadn't done anything like that in years, and it felt almost alien to spend time with someone who knew me before I had clearance levels. She walked in and raised an eyebrow when she saw me in the navy dress. "That's the dress?" I shrugged, smiling. "It's growing on me." We laughed. Over mugs of coffee, we talked about everything: Georgetown memories, our old professors. My missions, her PhD work. My silence, her forgiveness. She was one of the few people I could be fully honest with, and for the first time in years, I let someone know me without the filters. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You know what? I wish I wish you had let people see you sooner." I nodded slowly. Me too. But I wasn't ready before. That's the part no one talks about, that sometimes you wear invisibility. Not because you're ashamed, but because you're not yet ready to be known. Because being known means being vulnerable. It means the pain can find you just as easily as the praise. But now, I was ready. Later that evening, I pulled out an old photo album one my mother had made before she passed. It was filled with pictures no one in my family had ever seen. Not curated images, not posed holidays, just life. Me on my first day of school, gap-toothed and beaming. Me in high school alone at the science fair with a certificate in hand. Me on my Georgetown graduation day, my mother clapping so hard, she nearly dropped the camera. And there, near the back, a note in her handwriting. "To my Maddie, they won't always see you, but I always will. Keep walking. Keep shining. Quiet power lasts longer." I ran my fingers over the ink. Her absence had been the loudest part of my life for 3 years. No matter how many SUVs I rode in or how many lives I helped save, there was always that whisper inside. If only she were here to see it. But I think she did. That week, I received an invitation to speak at a leadership summit for young women in government. Normally, I'd pass it off to someone else, a rising star maybe, or a communications officer trained for public settings. But this time, I said yes. I stood on a small stage in front of 220-something women, most of them interns, aides, policy hopefuls. They looked nervous, eager, exactly how I had once felt in my first week in D.C. I told them about the work, about the cost, about the silence, about the rewards that don't come with applause. Then I told them the dress story. Yes, I told them everything. I said they laughed at me for wearing this dress. But outside that ballroom, 6 black SUVs were waiting not for a fashion icon, but for a director. You see, the world will always measure women by surface-level metrics. Your hair, your tone, your clothes, let them. While they're distracted, you do the real work, and then one day you arrive. And they won't laugh again. There was silence. Then applause. Some stood. One cried. Afterward, a young woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. She said, "You made me feel like I belong in this space." I thought of Haley. I thought of Aunt Celeste. Then I thought of my mother. And I smiled. "You do," I said. "Now go take your space." That evening back home, I finally posted the full story online. No anonymity, no vague titles. I told the whole thing: the dress, the party, the SUVs. I included photos of me through the years, the science fair, the Georgetown speech, a blurred image of a foreign dignitary shaking my hand in a desert base. The caption was short. They saw a dress. I was building a life. Let this be a lesson. Quiet women are never weak, and being underestimated is a weapon. By the next morning, the post had gone viral, not for the fashion, not for the government gossip, but for the truth of it. Messages poured in from young women across the country, girls studying political science, military wives, first-gen college students, Black women, brown women, rural women, women like me, overlooked, dismissed, and deeply, quietly powerful. I answered every message I could, because if I had known back then that there were others like me, maybe I would have stepped forward sooner. But now I was here, visible, whole, and still proudly wearing that navy blue dress. Because the truth is, the joke wasn't on me. It was on anyone who ever thought I was just background. And now I write the script.